Guys, we are going down the list covering all these seasonal weapons. This one is one you have all asked us to look over since week 1. That being this linear fusion rifle, Doomed Petitioner. Now, it's an aggressive frame linear fusion, which means it's one of the few that actually shoots in a 3-round burst. Now, this one has a lot of very interesting trait combinations, and things get even more interesting considering it is that 3-round burst. Today, we're going to be breaking down this weapon completely, guys, and also doing comparisons to our other top tier linears. Now, let's start with our perks. In the left column, we have Threat Detector, Permeability, Keep Away, Attrition Orbs, Destabilizing Rounds, Envious Assassin, and Reconstruction. In our right column, we have Surrounded, Deconstruct, Moving Target, High Ground, Golden Tricorn, Loose Change, and Precision Instruments. Now, if you're looking at any of these, I think the perk that's probably going to jump out to you the most in that third column is our ammo-based perks, that being Envious Assassin and Reconstruction. However, I would say don't overlook Permeability, as it previously had a damage glitch that allowed us to essentially stack 7 different surges. Talked about it in our Crux review, but unfortunately, Bungie shadow patched it. I know, Golden Gun was also hit, as kinetic surges no longer buff our damage there. And what's crazy was none of this was even disclosed in the patch notes. Now, is Permeability good for other reasons, taking advantage of other elemental types? Absolutely. But we're talking about a linear fusion rifle, and we want more shots to shoot. Therefore, Envious Assassin and Reconstruction are pretty much our go-to perks. Now, for Envious Assassin, it reads that defeating targets with other weapons before drawing this one transfers ammo to the magazine from reserves. This effect can overflow the magazine based on the number of targets defeated. A very popular perk for DPS weapons, as we can actually overflow our magazine up to 150% of its base capacity. Now, before I actually recommend this perk, I find myself liking this perk more on rocket launchers, as you can abuse Bungie's rounding of numbers to get the most out of its overflowing effects. Here on a linear, it's good, but makes less of an impact, especially when we talk about Reconstruction. Now, Reconstruction's description reads, this weapon slowly reloads itself over time, up to double capacity. Now, Reconstruction will refill 10% of the magazine every 4 seconds, with this effect maxing out at double the base magazine size, just as the description said. And then, since this weapon is craftable, the enhanced version lowers the interval between refills to 3.5 seconds. Now, guys, I don't think I need to say that Reconstruction is a phenomenal perk. Most of you already know. Passively reloads, and on top of that, it overflows your weapon. Come on, which means it's not just good as a DPS weapon, but also great for just like running and gunning and things like Grandmaster Nightfalls. So for our left column, I'm gonna go with Reconstruction. Now, moving over to our right column, the perk that really jumped out to us at first was Precision Instrument. Now, it got a buff this season. We're gonna touch on that in just a second, but the perk reads, dealing sustained damage increases precision damage. And the perk works off of stacks, with any hit granting 1 stack that lasts for 1.25 seconds. Now, if you miss, you lose it all. Now, the damage increase from each stack is about 4%, or starting at about 4.17% and capping out at a flat 25% at 6 stacks. Now, the big thing with this perk is that you can enhance it, and our damage bonus actually goes up. Our new damage is plus 5% from each stack, ending at a very respectable 30% buff. And this was the buff that I was just mentioning. Prior to this season, the enhanced version increased damage by a whopping 1% on the top end. So thank God Bungie changed that. Now, the other thing I want to highlight from this perk is that, unique to this linear, we reach maximum damage in just 2 shots. Since each individual hit gives us a stack, the 3-round burst means we hit the cap at the end of the second shots. So yes, this perk is fantastic. We get bonus damage without needing any setup, and it's easy to keep up perpetually as long as you don't miss your target completely. And you have the forgiveness there with it being a burst fire linear. It's the same reason why on pulse rifles, I love perks like Rapid Hit, because you can get stacks of Rapid Hit in a single burst. The same situation applies here with Doomed Petitioner and Precision Instrument. Now, the other damage perk that's also present in this column is Surrounded, which states that the weapon gains bonus damage when 3 or more enemies are in close proximity. Now, this is a more common damage perk, but it offers one of the highest damage buffs in the game. Base Surrounded gives us a 40% damage buff increase for being within 8 meters of 3 enemies. And I did say base, as just like Precision Instruments, Enhanced Surrounded has increased damage. The enhanced version offers a whopping 47% increase in damage, up from 40%. And this changes depending on the weapon, right? And when we look at rocket launchers, and most notably Crux, that damage buff was around 36%. So the fact that it scales differently here means Surrounded is actually better on certain weapon types. Granted, it should, because it's requiring you to be in some risky territories. You gotta have 3 enemies around you. You gotta land shots while they're sitting there smacking you in the face with whatever. But if you are able to manage those things, every shot from start to finish will be dealing 47% more damage, which is beautiful. It all depends on the encounters that you're in though. Warlord's Ruin, Ghost of the Deep, those are areas that I find proccing Surrounded to be very easy. But in everything else, where you don't have enemies available, I would opt for Precision Instrument. Instrument, which takes us to our God roll. You want Ionized Battery to get 6 in the mag. Then you either want Reconstruction plus Surrounded or Reconstruction plus Precision Instrument. The God roll simply relies on where it's being used though. And lastly, before we look at some DPS comparisons, we need to quickly touch on its origin trait, Dragon's Vengeance. This trait reads, when an ally dies or you reach critical health, this weapon's magazine refills and it gains bonus range, charge rate, and handling. Now the +5 range and +10 handling is nice, but it's that 2.5% decrease in charge time for 11 seconds. This perk helps DPS. No, it's not substantial, but it does contribute to that faster charge time. And then on top of that, you get a free ammo refill. And look, you may find yourself even in a DPS scenario reaching critical health. Although I wouldn't recommend doing it intentionally or even having an ally sacrifice themselves just for you to get a reload. But it is a good origin trait, one we've talked about before on our previous weapon reviews. Now we can start looking at DPS. Specifically, is it better than its competitors? There are 3 other aggressive linear fusion rifles, that being Storm Chaser, Fire and Forget, and Briar's Contempt. Out of these other aggressives, Briar's Contempt is the only one with perks that can keep up with Doomed Petitioner. And then outside of that, we also have things like Cataclysmic and Sleeper Simulant. But let's touch on Briar's versus Petitioner first. As they're both craftable, they can both row Enhanced Surrounded, Enhanced Reconstruction, making their performance equal when in a surrounded setting. But then what if you can't proc Surrounded? Briar's Contempt can roll with Focus Fury, whereas Doomed Petitioner can get Precision Instrument. Between the two, Focus Fury culminates in a 20% damage buff after 2 shots, whereas Precision Instrument, we're getting that 30% damage buff after 2 shots, alongside a ramp up all the way to that point. Whereas like Focus Fury, you have no damage buff, and then you get the 20% buff. And without even labeling like the DPS values here, Doomed Petitioner is better than Briar's Contempt. Where Briar's Contempt pulls ahead is when you're up against Lucent Hive, most notably because of its origin trait, Harmonic Resonance. Where equipping multiple weapons with Harmonic Resonance grants a number of benefits, most notably though, the increase in damage versus Tormentors, Lucent Hive, and Guardians using their super. And if you're rocking 2 weapons with Harmonic Resonance, this is an added 10% buff on Briar's Contempt. So it really comes down to the encounter, right? For Ghost of the Deep, especially the final encounter, I would still rock Briar's Contempt with another weapon that has Harmonic Resonance, most notably Paco integration, to get that extra 10% buff on top of everything else. And the fact that it's solar this season, which synergizes really nicely with our artifact mods. I know, we're doing a Doomed Petitioner review right now, but this is just a call out to Briar's Contempt. It's a good linear. It's solar, it can proc Radiant really quickly. Use it, fellas. Now let's look at DPS values. First, I'm gonna take a look at Cataclysmic, the standard for linear fusions. It gets a 35% damage buff from bait and switch, and it's able to extend its magazine through 4 times the charm. Now looking at the damage numbers, 1 full magazine of Cataclysmic deals a total of 770,317 damage over roughly 10 seconds, coming out to a 1 mag DPS of 76,420. Then looking at the Burstier Sleeper Simulant, we have a 1 mag DPS of 101,897. Then lastly, before seeing Petitioner's numbers, we have a hypothetical scenario with a surrounded Briar's Contempt, making use of that ×2 Harmonic Resonance. This comes out to a DPS value of 95,222. Now here comes our challenger. 1 mag DPS from Doomed Petitioner with Precision Instrument comes out to 75,249. With Surrounded, it beats that at 86,565. Now here's the thing. Things actually shift as we start to simulate a longer damage window. Going into a 2 mag DPS phase, Cataclysmic needs to reload and reproc its perk, lowering its DPS to 60,895. Sleeper Simulant falls a lot, dropping to 79,234 DPS across 2 mags. And then our beefed up Briar's Contempt clocks in at 86,720 DPS. Moving on to Doomed Petitioner with Precision Instrument, its 2 mag DPS is 67,102, only dropping a little bit thanks to its perk activations. And then above that, again, we have Petitioner with Surrounded, its 2 mag DPS of 77,643. So what's the takeaway from all of this? Number 1, Surrounded is incredible if you can proc it, especially on Briar's Contempt, up against Lucent Hive and enemies that take increased damage. But Surrounded on Doomed Petitioner, everywhere else, is fantastic. Even a Precision Instrument Doomed Petitioner can hang with Sleeper and Cataclysmic. Keep in mind though, Cataclysmic has the best ammo economy due to 4 times the charm, the bait and switch swap offs, but we're looking at DPS here. With all this being said though, I would argue that Doomed Petitioner is in the top 3 best linears. It's craftable, it has perks that synergize better than what we've seen on other linears, and whether it's Precision Instrument or Surrounded, both will serve you well. So that's our review for Doomed Petitioner. You've only got a short 4 months to get this crafted, which means all of us should definitely have this before the final shape. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.